Hello everyone, welcome to our channel A Anything. Today we are going to do the breakdown and find the hidden details in the first episode of Loki Season 2, and you can watch the series on Disney+. The first episode is titled Ouroboros, which is a name of a character in this series, played by Ke Huy Quan. You must have saw him in the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. Ouroboros also symbolizes cyclical renewal, or an end that marks a beginning, which foreshadows the story of this episode. We will talk about it later in the video. While starting the video, I want to tell you that this video contains heavy spoilers of this episode, and if you haven't watched this episode already, then watch this on your own discretion as this video is full of spoilers. So now, without wasting any more time, let's delve into the video. The first episode of Loki Season 2 starts with exactly where Season 1 of Loki ended. In the ending of Season 1, we saw Loki is sent back to TVA by Sylvie. This TVA is different than we saw before. Here, instead of the statue of the three timekeepers, we see a statue of He Who Remains. And because Sylvie kills He Who Remains, the sacred timeline starts branching into multiple timelines, resulting into sacred timeline completely mixed with infinite number of alternate timelines. We are in the multiverse now. In the end, we see Loki trying to explain whatever is happening to Mobius and Hunter B-15, but they don't even remember him. Now, the first episode of Loki Season 2 opens with an elaborate chase sequence as Mobius and the TVA try to arrest or maybe prune Loki because he is an intruder. To save himself, he jumps off a balcony to escape, lands in a flying car which then crashes into a He Who Remains statue and then an office, and the TVA logo on the floor is damaged. No one Loki encounters there recognizes him, but before he can be apprehended, something strange happens to him and he is seemingly teleported away into the same office, though this time, they recognize him. Loki notices the floor is damaged in exactly the same spot from before, and he realizes he was in the past but is now in the present. Loki realizes that he is slipping through time. As in, his body is teleporting between the past, the present, and the future. But the teleporting is limited to the TVA. He isn't getting transported somewhere outside the TVA. He just keeps showing up at different points in time at the TVA. So, Mobius and Hunter B-15 didn't remember him because he showed up in a time period when they hadn't met Loki yet. When he gets teleported in the past in the same office, he meets Casey, who doesn't recognize him and calls the guards to capture him. However, when Loki time slips into the present, he meets present version of Casey, who do remember him. Before he could meet Mobius and Hunter B-15 again, he time slips again. There is a little detail here, that when we see Casey for the first time in this office, he is listening a clip from the Staying Awake podcast which Stephen Grant also listened to in Moon Knight's first episode. We can also see him holding TVA guidebook, written by Ouroboros aka Obi, who we'll see later in the episode. You can also notice that there is not just one statue of He Who Remains in the TVA. Here comes another detail, that the first episode of Season 1 of Loki starts with Loki running away, and the first episode of second season also starts with Loki running away, but this time from TVA. After the intro, we see Mobius and Hunter B-15 are looking at a monitor and seeing how utterly messed up the sacred timeline is with all the branching timelines. Mobius, Hunter B-15 and pretty much the rest of the TVA are all still comprehending the fact that they've been fed with lies about the gods they're serving and that they had lives on their very own timelines. Meanwhile, Casey comes and informs Mobius and B-15 about Loki. While they talk, X5, a prominent TVA hunter, informs Mobius and B-15 that they've to attend a meeting with General Dox and Judge Gamble, who are filling in for Renslayer, who was last seen walking through a time door along with Miss Minutes. As they proceed to the war room, Loki continues to slip between the past and the present as he too goes to the war room. Loki eventually makes it to the war room, but there is no one there. Inside are wall motifs with the various faces of He Who Remains as he's in another time again. In the war room, we can see a multi-faced mural of He Who Remains, which resembles with the face of Hindu god Brahma, who is called the creator of the universe according to Hinduism. While He Who Remains is the creator of the TVA and maybe the whole universe of Sacred Timeline too. While Mobius and B-15 deal with things in the present, trying to defend their actions, Loki explores the room and is listening to a recording of He Who Remains speaking with Renslayer. Luckily, this allows him to uncover the relationship between He Who Remains and Renslayer, and the hidden mural of He Who Remains, which has been covered with a mural of the Timekeepers in the present. In Mobius and B-15's meeting, Judge Gamble kind of sides with B-15's pleas to stop pruning timelines because, in doing so, they're essentially committing genocide. General Dox, who is a bit of a hardliner, is against that notion because the only thing she has known all her life is pruning branching timelines and variants. Loki appears and finally connects with Mobius, telling him that they found He Who Remains, and he then burns away the mural to reveal the He Who Remains mural underneath. As soon as General Dox learns that Sylvie is the one who killed He Who Remains and destabilized the whole universe, she tells X5 to prepare a team that'll find the Loki variant. Loki tells Mobius that they are all coming, explaining what happened with Sylvie at the end of time. He tells Mobius that war is on its way. Mobius doesn't remember any of the past with He Who Remains, and Loki explains that He Who Remains wiped his memory multiple times and time is working in the TVA now, which it should not be. Loki also says they can't trust Miss Minutes. Mobius takes Loki deep into the TVA, to RNA, which means Department of Repairs and Advancement, where he meets Ouroboros aka OB. OB identifies what is happening to Loki as time slipping, and he can't fix it because it's supposed to be impossible at the TVA. Loki ends up in the RNA in the past, and past OB tells him the same thing, time slipping is impossible, but back in the present, OB suddenly remembers seeing Loki in the past, proof that time slipping is indeed happening. OB says he'd need a temporal aura extractor, and past OB creates one and holds onto it. In the present, he gives it and the instructions how to use it. They must get to the temporal loom, then Loki must prune himself so he can be pulled back together in the present. He says, theoretically, when Loki is freed, the extractor is going to catch him and bring him into the present, thereby curing his time slipping. Loki shows up again in the present and OB's lamp is flickering. Mobius says they've had power surges all day, which concerns OB. Turns out, the branching is overloading the temporal loom and it's bad because it's in meltdown. It was only OB who can help Loki in all this situation, since OB is the author of the TVA guidebook. OB's plan to fix Loki's time slipping is made all the more difficult by the fact that the time loom, which processes time into a physical timeline, is overloading because of the branching timelines trying to become one with the sacred timeline. So, in order to fix the time loop, OB has to close the blast doors and find a way for the cosmic device to properly process all the branching timelines. Since this is a quickly devolving situation, they have only one shot to resync Loki. They have only 5 minutes to make this work. In those 5 minutes, Mobius has to hook the extractor to the loom, Loki has to prune himself, and OB has to close the blast doors to protect the TVA. We can notice that the gate of temporal loom control room looks exactly like the Cerebro in X-Men movies. Meanwhile, Loki time slips again, but this time, to a point in the future. In the present, Mobius starts his part of the process and heads out into the highly dangerous part of the loom to get time energy. In future, Loki is left with the meter that'll indicate if Mobius has succeeded in his mission or not, but the time stick that he'll need to prune himself doesn't go with him. In the present, OB sends Mobius out onto the bridge between the TVA building and the time loom. He successfully hooks up the extractor with the loom. However, since Loki doesn't have a time stick, they are unable to complete the maneuver. OB says that he needs to close the blast doors, or else the entire TVA will be incinerated. OB hits the button to close the blast doors, telling Mobius that Loki is lost to time and Mobius himself is stuck outside the blast doors. In the future, Loki comes across a ringing telephone near the elevator. As he goes out to reach it, Sylvie appears from inside an elevator and suddenly. But before Loki can say something to her, he is pruned. We can notice a time stick behind him, but we don't know who pruned him. We will talk about my speculations just after this, and it's interesting one. For a moment, it seems like OB's theory has failed, and that's exactly when we see Loki hurtling out of the loom. He crashes into Mobius, and the two make it back into the control room as the blast doors close behind them. Loki says that they need to find Sylvie. Meanwhile, we see Hunter B-15 in the corridor, watching Dox lead an entire army of hunters through time doors. She wonders why she is taking so much ammunition to catch a single variant. In Season 1, we've seen entire timelines being pruned with bombs, and it seems like Dox and her army are not just hellbent on recapturing Sylvie, they also want to prune the branches because that's what they've been trained to do. In a mid-credits scene, we see Sylvie stepping into Oklahoma in 1982. It's a branched timeline. She ends up walking into a McDonald's to get food. She watches all the people seeming happy, and says she wants to try everything. An episode ends here. Now I want to share my theories and speculations from this episode, and I want to know your opinion too, so don't forget to comment your opinion down below. The first question comes in our mind is, how can Loki even land in the past in TVA, while time even doesn't exist in TVA? So, maybe it is possible that time exists in TVA but not in the manner as we know. Let me explain. TVA doesn't exist in any timeline, and it's outside plus beyond timelines. And past, present and future can exist only in timelines, so you can jump in the past or future in timeline, or we can say you can time travel to past or future in your timeline, but, according to Avengers Endgame, you will land only in alternate timeline. In other words, you never time travel in your own timeline, you only jump to the past or future in another parallel timeline. But my point here is that there is always a timeline included whenever we talk about time travel. But as TVA doesn't falls in any timeline, so jumping in TVA from any time and from any timeline will only lead to the present of TVA. As we saw that when time doors are opened through TemPad to the TVA, it only leads to present TVA. But as we know, time is just happening of events from past to the future, so these events are also happening in TVA. So, maybe TVA has its own timeline from past to the future, but it has no parallel or alternate timeline. That's why if someone could go past in TVA, or in future in TVA, the TVA timeline will be same and the events that will happen in past will affect the future, as we saw in the episode. When Loki talks with past version of Obi, Obi remembers everything in present, while when Mobius writes skin in the dust, Loki could find out that he is in future as it is still written there. And by this logic, this is the first time in MCU when we saw Back to the Future kinda time travel phenomenon, which will also be true if in the whole universe there is only one timeline, and here this logic sits perfectly for TVA. Now another question is, in the recording, He Who Remains was talking about which war, in which Ravonna Renslayer proved to be very helpful to him. Well, we know that it was in past of TVA, but we don't know if that war even happened yet or not, because Ravonna Renslayer is missing since Season 1, we don't know where she went, but we know that she went to know where all this started, and perhaps she went to the past, and there she will maybe do something very helpful for He Who Remains. Here I have a wild theory, but before that I need to cover that who was actually behind Loki who pruned him. Well, it's only my theory, it can be true or maybe completely false, so here it goes. Since the finale of Loki Season 1, we know that Loki tried by any means to stop Sylvie from killing He Who Remains and protect him. And even in this episode, we know Loki said that maybe He Who Remains was not even a bad guy, he was just protecting everyone from multiversal war. So it is clear that Loki will do anything to protect him. Now, to protect He Who Remains, he have to be alive and saved, while in this episode he himself was suffering from time slipping, which if not resolved, he will die, or we can say, Loki and He Who Remains both dies. And this was his last chance to save himself, so what if it was actually Ravonna Renslayer who pruned Loki in the last minute, who by doing this, not only saved Loki but also He Who Remains? And this will lead to Loki saving He Who Remains from wherever that war is happening, for which He Who Remains was praising Ravonna in the recording. I have also noticed that when Sylvie finds Loki in future TVA, she says, "So you are here," as if she was trying to find Loki early and before anyone else. And yes, I think someone else was also finding Loki, as we know that the telephone was ringing constantly only which was near Loki, as if the caller knows the location of Loki. And before Loki and Sylvie could talk, he was pruned, and we couldn't even see the reaction of Sylvie to know if the person who pruned Loki was with her or not. Now you can maybe think that why Sylvie even don't want Loki to be pruned even if it can save Loki's life, then my opinion is she has mastered TemPad of He Who Remains, she is among the strongest multiversal beings now. She don't need Loki to be pruned to save him, but she could want to meet him before he was pruned to prevent something else from happening. This Sylvie is definitely from the future because in the mid-credit scenes, we saw the present Sylvie stepping into a McDonald's to get food. She looks satisfied by seeing people happy there, and perhaps she will stay in that timeline and live the life she always wanted to live. At least until her destiny doesn't take her somewhere else. Now the last thing, as the name of the episode is Ouroboros, which means an end that leads to beginning, some people are speculating that it was Loki who pruned himself in order to live, giving the title of the episode a sense. I believe this theory can also be true, but personally in a larger sense I think it refers to the story of the episode. Like, in the finale of Season 1, Sylvie sends Loki to TVA, and now Loki was supposed to resolve everything with the help of Mobius and Hunter B-15. But as he finds himself in the past TVA and also he starts time slipping, so the whole episode goes in him resolving this issue, and in the last, he is now finally in the present TVA along with Mobius and Hunter B-15. He is now in a situation where he was supposed to be in the ending of Season 1 and beginning of Season 2. So, maybe the ending of Episode 1 is actually the beginning of Season 2 in true sense, symbolizing Ouroboros in true sense, the ending leading to a beginning. So this was my breakdown of the first episode of Loki, Season 2. In case I missed any hidden detail from the episode, please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked the video and want to watch more like this, then like, comment, and share the video and subscribe the channel and hit the bell icon to never miss any video. See you next time.